So I have this new way of thinking about this trial and error. So I'm thinking right now, if I am somebody who's graduating grade 8, so I'm going to be probably 14 years old, and I have maybe an understanding of what siblings are going through or have gone through in high school, and I don't really know what to expect other than that, I'm going to be allowed to do a lot of the things that adults do, or that they're getting ready to be allowed to do. And I don't really know, I had to almost invite that age group into my cohort and then kind of evolve with them. Because usually when kids are in high school or kind of leaving high school, they don't really think backwards. Like, they're kind of excited about their own new beginning, and as young kids, we don't really know how to be. We call them like the cool kids. Like, we're looking forward to being them. We kind of look up to them, but we don't really know how do we kind of bridge and kind of come back to. Can you help us, like, support us and tell us, like, what we can learn from your experience? Sometimes now with YouTubers, and YouTubing being a thing, people will share their stories and they'll maybe talk about, I chose to travel and this is what I learned. This is where I chose to stay. This is where I chose to live. I stayed here for a year, maybe just backpacked across Europe, or spent some time in Asia, and I'm coming back to North America later, going back to South America, depending on where you're from. So it almost gives people glimpses of different possibilities, or different pathways, or different ladders through life, as it were. Like, if you think of different goals, and then you think there's a lot of ways to kind of reach that goal, and they might be pathways that kind of intersect if you think of like snakes and ladders. So if we have, for example, let's think of an 18-year-old, so somebody who's just graduated high school, and they've decided, I don't really want to go to university yet, or any kind of post-secondary education. I want to stay local. I don't mind maybe working full-time or part-time, just that, like, any job, just to kind of make money and decide what I want to do. What else can I do? So you'd be really curious if guidance counselors in high schools and in public schools or elementary schools can kind of get together and provide opportunities for these individuals who are kind of like in that in-between stage to kind of like come and share their stories, and maybe be supports in kind of like in a volunteer fashion or capacity, or kind of like a co-op to whatever their professional career is. And just say, like, I want to almost be like a mentor for you, just to kind of tell you what we did, what you can expect, and then how can we almost support a new way of thinking. Because it took like 6 years ago when we were in grade 8, we used to do this in school. Now at grade 12, we don't really do it. We don't study, for example, in the way that we used to. But in grade 6 for you guys right now, you're studying the way that we maybe did in grade 12. So I wonder what it's going to be like for you guys when you're in grade 12. And then you think back to like kindergarten and be like, how are these? So you can see how it almost breaks that zeitgeist where we're stuck as a community, or sometimes within families, like siblings, where it's like, our younger friend or sibling could do this, we couldn't, and then how do we get stuck, and how do we allow ourselves to integrate and collaborate so that everybody gets that kind of holistic approach to understanding a new way of living. So if we almost kind of move forward and backwards at the same time in that kind of circular fashion, it is almost kind of like that double helix of DNA, where it's we call them mutations, but they don't have to be bad ones. It's almost like sometimes a sequence of gene expression, or like maybe understandings, if we can just kind of find that parallel, they change and they evolve. And sometimes it can be a healthy way. Like, if you think of evolution, maybe some people a long time ago couldn't spend a lot of time in the sun. Like, they burn really quickly. With time, our skin adapts, and then we eventually learn that, maybe the skin cannot burn and it just gets tanned. So it doesn't maybe absorb as much UV rays, and then the pigmentation darkens a little bit, just like it tanned, we call it. But it doesn't burn, so it doesn't hurt, right? And then we understand, well, now we have kind of sunscreen or lotion to help kind of create a barrier so we don't hurt ourselves. So all these things, some people will call them mutations, or like an evolution, where our body's adapting to a new environment and learning how to cope so that it can remain healthy. So if we think of it as our way of thinking wants to do that, where we want to support new learning styles, new ways that people can learn new ideas and integrate them outside of what might have been allowed. So, for example, some families might not know how to talk about sexuality, right? So I know when I was going through school, it wasn't, I think, until grade 6 or 7, maybe even grade 8, that I started to think about this in any way. And even then it was mostly just like, our bodies are changing. We have, for women, they'll develop breasts. For a man, he'll develop like a deeper voice. He'll maybe grow taller. And that was basically the extent of it. It wasn't until I think in grade 9 that like we had a health class, and then we got really like involved in like healthy sexual practices and drugs and be careful with tobacco and such things. That was 1997, right? So you can imagine that was grade 9, 1997. So now if you think back words and you think, wow, like kids could probably be talking about this in a very healthy way in grade 2, right? So they're like grade 8 or grade 9. And that's a very healthy thing, because it's almost allowing people to understand, well, did you have a boyfriend, and what was it like the first time, and did you have like, were you a boy and you had a boyfriend, were you a girl and you had a girlfriend, what was that like? And if people almost understand, like we watch this on TV and this is normal life, like you can have your next door neighbor or like, you know, a friend that goes to school who'll like to talk about that, and that can become your friend. And in doing that, it almost helps kids prepare, like what do I have to look forward to in life, instead of what should I be scared about, or what am I already not allowed to do, or what can I think about doing that I'm not allowed to do but maybe I want to think about talking with my family about, so that I can help them understand, like, look, it's very normal, like these kids are turning out fine, they're actually more attuned with the world. Like you think of Renaissance people, like people who just are so worldly because they've traveled so far and wide, they've come across so many different cultures and so many ways of being, that they're just such an enriched cultured person that people almost want to constantly learn with them, that you're almost like, well, what's to stop anybody from doing that? Like, we'll naturally build an ethic. We know that there's a verse that almost allows us to understand that there's a sustainer in the world that helps promote this way of thinking, and helps almost support it by, you know, if something's not going to be healthy for you, there'll be just this natural block that'll almost force you to think, I have to find a different way. And if you already know that that's kind of the way the world is built, like what's really to stop us? So I'm thinking now, from my personal experience, I've been out of school for about 12 years because my experience at Carleton was a shock to like my whole identity. Like I really had to stop and kind of review like everything I understood about Islam, like as my identification as a Muslim, and then how do I think about people outside of everything I understood about my history. So, you know, my parents were very traditional. They understood that this is kind of like our expectation of our family, and it would be cool if you could kind of align with that. But at the time I was like, yeah, that's good, but there's so many new ways of thinking now. Like the way I'm thinking about other people now is not that they're different from us, it's almost like we have so much to learn with each other. So because it took me that long, the whole process of thinking of going back to school was almost like, yeah, I can, but I like learning outside of school. So if I was to have, you know, a job, like just working, and then what I'm studying, I'm kind of talking about with the people that I work with, and maybe it's part of what my job is, and like I can inform my family. So it's not something that's kind of closed off in a school setting, but it's kind of already in the world. And in doing that, I'm almost continuing learning. Like I've almost set myself up for like continuous learning, and I'm not stopping in any way or pausing for any long time. So I have this group of people who have maybe been thinking with me, but in a parallel way. So not really integrating it, but they're just thinking with me, like, what happened to Hiba? Like, we don't see her. We know that she went to study this. We're thinking about what her experience might have been like from maybe a Christian worldview, or from a Buddhist worldview, or from wondering about jinn. Like, is she gone? Like, is her spirit in the world if her body's not? Or is it the reverse? Like, her body's here, but her spirit's gone? Right? And people have these almost metaphysical understandings of the universe, and they're trying to understand how to make sense of it in a mundane world or a profane world, where usually people don't think about these things in kind of like a bureaucratic world, because like, how do you have the same face, have the same name, but all of a sudden you're like somebody else entirely? Like, how do we put that in a system and say, you know, the way we identify people is based on, you know, where they were born, what their name is, what they've learned like in school, and that's it. Now to give us completely something different and say you're now somebody else, like we can't follow that. Like, what does that tell us? So you have all these different parallels now of people who think about one thing in so many different ways, that we almost want to say, okay, everybody's being tentative or being careful about the way they're thinking about something. And now we have robotics, which we have technology that's saying this person hasn't changed, she's still here or he's still here, but what we know about this person now is very different, because maybe they've been really, really quiet and they're just thinking on their own, and only now are they building some kind of information about who they have been, or who they are thinking of becoming, or who they were learning to become in this whole almost quiet period of time. So for me, if I was somebody who was maybe in a university setting, I would be like, well, this is a pretty cool sociological phenomenon. Like, I'm trying to understand different cultures. maybe it's one really, really big culture with lots of different diversities within it, and they're all trying to make sense of the same thing. We don't want to get anybody in trouble because we don't want to make anybody nervous about trying something new in the future, but we have to almost build new rules around this, right? So this could be the way someone explains the phenomenon of Muhammad, right? So sometimes people will say, we all saw him at a time when he actually got a revelation, right? So some people explain him as sitting down, and when he gets a revelation, it's almost like he gets an inspiration, or like the angel visits him and he gets really, 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 really sweaty. Almost to say, like, it's so heavy that his body almost can't withstand the gravity of it. So maybe the meaning really is really, really deep. Or maybe his heart just feels like, oh my gosh, I feel so close and so reverent to that, like, awe-inspiring feeling, where, like, my heart wants to collapse, like, but it also wants to live to experience it. So it's almost like my body and my mind and my metaphysical heart are all grappling to hold on to all of this at once, and they can't. So my actual physical body has to, like, almost hold on. So you think of people who lift weights, right? People wonder about, like, how long can you hold a weight up, and how heavy is it, right? So some people will call that, I think it's called endurance. So how long can you do something that's very difficult, and how long can you do it for at one moment? I think stamina is a different thing. So it's all these different ways of measuring how long you can do something that's very difficult, and then over periods of time. So if you do it once, is that it? Or can you do it repetitively, like in the future for like a month? Or can you do it for like 13 years or 23 years? So the fact that the Prophet had all these different moments of revelation or receiving revelation throughout his life with different companions, they all have different ways of explaining it. And so it's almost to help us understand that we can understand why Moses, when he asked to see God, because he's like, I'm so curious, like, you're talking to me and I can hear you, but where are you? Like, can you show me where you are? And God, knowing about himself, he's like, you're not going to be able to withstand it. So he said, if I actually almost descend on a mountain, the mountain will crumble. Which means, like, as humans, we can actually build that kind of metaphysical strength to the point that we can withstand something without collapsing. But we shouldn't jump into it too quickly, because if we do, and we don't know what to expect about seeing God or witnessing some kind of meaning, it does destabilize, and we almost don't know how to react because we don't know what to expect, right? That almost gap of meaning and understanding creates this feeling of, the only thing I know is that I don't know, and then what do I do? So then sometimes people just want to retreat, or they want to go to the hospital and just be like, I need a break because my brain just didn't know how to react and how to understand what just happened. And that's a very healthy understanding and a very healthy reaction. It's almost like sometimes people take calming drugs to help them calm down and then learn how to talk about what they just witnessed. So all of these things help us understand how one experience can be felt by that one person in one way, and then everybody who saw it around them at different times can describe it in a different way. So in psychology, this is called, I don't actually remember what the phenomenon is called, but it's basically talking about how, as an eyewitness, sometimes it's very difficult to get a complete story about one thing that's going to have a very common thread. So people will compare and contrast what they saw, and you'll have a lot of different variations of the same thing. And sometimes it is because we have a subconscious that informs how we understand something, right? So if I see a person helping somebody out of a car accident, maybe somebody will say, oh, this woman, she was taking this infant out of the car and she knew how to hold the baby, right? Somebody will say, oh, this mother took the baby out because she knew how to hold the baby and how to hold it. Now, someone else would say, oh, I know that woman. She's not a nurse, but that's her baby, so she knows how to hold the baby. Someone else will say, no, she works with me. She's a nurse. She knows how to hold the baby out of a car accident. Someone else will say, I know this person. They have no idea what first aid is. That's why they waited for the ambulance. And they were almost telling the other people, wait. And then they said, no, we know. And then they helped the baby out. So all these different informations that all these different individuals have are going to inform how they make sense of this one occurrence. Now, you can think about something that's supernatural, or that's something people haven't really come in contact with or have no knowledge of. If they haven't studied it in the past, or know that this has actually happened in the past in different ways with different people who are called prophets, we call prophets or seers, and we know this because they came with books that told stories about people like them that came in the past that are also called prophets but have different names. So we can think about Solomon, we can think about David, we can think about Jesus, John, Zachary, all these names that we know because they came with miracles. So something that broke a law of nature that was normal, and well, at the time would have been abnormal, but with time now that we see, like with technology, all these things that happened in the past were almost like, well, they're not really miracles because we're doing them now. But it's not that it's not a miracle, it's just we've become so normalized to them that we don't really see them as something that's breaking the law of gravity or nature in any way, that it's like, oh, that's kind of normal, it's cool. But when we think backwards, we think, yeah, it probably didn't happen, but we can actually think about how technology and robots enable it to happen. And that constant, like, revisiting something that happened in the past that originally was like, nah, I don't think so, but we revisit it with a new lens, allows us to find new ways of understanding it and making it something that our intellect is happy to kind of grapple with, and our heart can kind of align with, as though, yeah, I do have faith that somehow time knows how to predict the future, almost to say this is going to be allowed in the future, but at the time it was just something that maybe somebody dreamed about and talked about and said it's going to happen in the future, we just don't know how. So all of these things I'm basically talking about as a way to say, how do we judge all these things without making people feel like we have to hold back from trying something new because we might get in trouble. So one person that I used to work with before cannabis was legalized, so I think it was in 2018, that in Canada it became legal. Before that, if you took marijuana, you had to have some kind of terminal illness, and taking the medication, marijuana was like something that the doctor would prescribe, and it was usually to help alleviate pain so that they wouldn't feel any of the pain that's usually associated with terminal illnesses. That terminal illness means they're going to die, like their life is almost cut short in a way because their body's sick in some way. So if one person decides, my mom or my grandma, they take this medicinal cannabis, and I want to try a little bit of it. And then they just walk to the store and they come back, and then an officer sees them and says, are you okay? You look like, because if you're, for example, if you're under the influence of alcohol or you're drunk, you're not supposed to be in public just walking around because you might hurt somebody by accident, right? You're supposed to be kind of like, if you're in a party or somebody's going to drive you from one place to another, and then it's known it's the end. So maybe that's what happened, right? Somebody noticed, like an officer noticed that one person was like, wait, are you supposed to be out here like this? And then maybe they got them in trouble. They gave them a ticket and they said, this is not something that we're allowed to do in this country yet. This fine you have to pay to almost stop you from wanting to do this again, because this is just a natural consequence. If you're not allowed to do something and you do it anyway, you have to pay for it in some way to discourage you from continuing this behavior. So that's something for cannabis. Now, if you think about the way we treat each other as humans, you might think maybe like we think of the story of David, where he's just sitting in a chamber or a temple and he's praying, and he's just trying to understand the universe and how to interact with himself and how to think about the universe. And then two people just come in and he's just like, what? But they're actual angels. He doesn't know that. He knows that he's a prophet and he gets inspired because maybe he hears mountains and birds and he understands their language, or they're kind of praising God in a way that he feels like it resonates with me. Like when I praise God, I hear them, or I hear something outside of me, and it almost reminds me that everything in the universe is praising God in some way. So then he sees these angels and he thinks, you just invaded my privacy, right? But then they'll say, no, we're here to actually help you understand that as much as you love to worship, you also have to be in the world and understand how to be in the world and how to interact with other people and how to earn a living so that you don't just die, right? You have to be able to make money to earn money to feed yourself and to live. It shouldn't be that somebody does this for you. So in this way, it's almost like these stories, some might say they're a big dream that the prophet had and the angel inspired him with, and they didn't actually happen in history. Some people will say, no, they actually happened, and we know, right? And that's allowing for a diversity of opinion and a diverse way of understanding the same thing. But the idea is sometimes we won't think that, in the time of David, they had rights. So it was like anybody could go into anybody's house without knocking, right? Maybe in Muhammad's time it was like that. They didn't have like an actual structure. It was just they call out and say, is anybody home? Can we come in? And they'd be like, yeah, okay. And then they just maybe open like a curtain or something, and then they let people in. Now we know that there are doorbells or locks. Everybody has an understanding of, well, in a civilized society, you have to knock and you have to make sure, maybe sometimes you call before you even go to someone's house, just to make sure that they're not busy or they don't have anything else planned, and that you're not interrupting it. And then you say, I'm here, do you mind if I spend some time with you? And they'll say, yeah, sure, come on in. And that's respecting boundaries. So if you think, well, right now, some people maybe wanted to study what jinn were, or they wanted to think, we're all family, so we can all just almost um, not respect boundaries, but it's almost like, can you just be a little bit flexible with your boundary? Because I'm trying to understand something that you seem to understand, right? And maybe they'll say, I'm just going to pretend to be you. Well, you seem to be studying, and I'm going to try to understand the way people think about a woman who's studying, and I'm a boy, right? In my mind, if I know or didn't know, I know that, like, as family, we tried to make allowances for each other. So like, I'll make an excuse and say, okay, that's fine, but if I find out and it's causing trouble, then maybe we're gonna have to talk about why we're doing this, and maybe stop or accommodate or collaborate and integrate new ideas and how to move forward. So in this way, it's almost like I could get somebody in trouble, or they could get me in trouble, but instead, why don't we try to talk about it and collaborate and think about, okay, well, we tried this and it didn't work, because within like our family, maybe the way we were brought up, it's like, no, we're not allowed. But when you went to study, you found out that actually we are allowed. So now what? Like, I thought I was going to get you in trouble. You thought you were going to get me in trouble, but actually we just developed something new, and we want to try to move forward with it, right? And that could be one of them. One of them used to be traveling alone. My dad used to tell me, I don't think it's safe for you to travel alone because you're a girl. That used to drive me insane. I used to actually think, I'm like, when I get older, I'm going to do it anyway. And it never happened. Like, even after he passed away, I planned to study and actually go teach English in another country. And even though I did all the work, like I took the courses, I had my passport, I sent the paperwork in, and I got accepted. And then when it came time to actually go and do it, something was in the way, and it was almost like, well, it's just not meant to be for me. It's not meant to be. So knowing that, it's almost to say, well, it's not that I'm not allowed. It's maybe just that the universe is saying, even though you want something, and it's going to be not okay, or originally wasn't okay for you as a girl, you have to understand for yourself and for other people why it is actually okay. So by you actually being a pioneer and thinking about, well, some girls in conservative families are allowed to travel alone. Why is it that your family's kind of lagging behind for a little bit? And then you think, well, that's a good idea. I have to wonder about that. And then I have to share these ideas. And then we have to wonder, like, what was it that used to scare us? And then why do we not have to feel scared anymore? And in that way, now I'm doing work for me and for other people, but it's not really work for, it's almost like we're all supporting each other and moving forward, so that nobody feels like they're left behind in any way. And this is almost to help us also understand fate. So people who say, I'm going to try to do something anyway and take a shortcut. So it's almost like I'm going to force somebody to change their mind so they're not sitting in my way. You can think of that as, you know what, even if you try to do that, it's not going to work, because the universe is actually stopping you for a reason. And for example, like my story explains the reason. It's almost to say, not enough people support your idea, and you might get in trouble somewhere by somebody. So if we all move together and understand the reason why we are allowed, nobody's going to try to get you in trouble by accident. So if you understand, let's pretend I die at 50, right? I tried my best to live an ethical life, not to hurt anybody. So I think, maybe I died in a university library studying. So for somebody, they could think, oh, she's so lucky. When she's born in her next life, she might be born in a country that loves to study. So then you think, oh, she's already kind of built a future for herself. That sounds really good. But it ends up that maybe I'm born in a country that they don't have universities built yet. But it's almost because I love doing that, I love being a pioneer, that I end up living maybe somewhere in the middle of Africa. And they're still thinking about how to build like safe homes and safe ways of drinking water and safe ways of building families, that by the time, I'm born and I reach the age of 30, I'm already thinking, I want to go back to North America. Maybe I don't even know that I used to live there. And I think I'm going to go and study in North America. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back with a lot of people, and we're going to try to find a way to build like a learning institute that's going to attract people to come here and teach and learn and study together. So you can see how there's no shortcut, because this is something I already kind of built into my consciousness that I want. My next life is almost going to be like part 2 or level 2. We don't know if it's going to be hard or difficult. It's just going to be something that already aligns with something that I love doing. And because I love doing it, it's almost like my personal kind of heaven, because it's something I already enjoy doing. And the universe just says, okay, well, then here's a way to do it, and continue doing it, and involve other people who will also think with you to support what you're doing. So if we understand this, we're not going to try to take shortcuts or scam people or gimmick people or almost find a way to use jinn or like make up these ghost stories to get in somebody's way. Because if we do that, we're actually getting in our own way. Like we're taking away from our own reason for finding our own heaven. we're getting in the way of somebody who, I mean, God's not going to let their life actually stop. He's just going to say, I'm going to let you die early. So it looks like they actually took over your life. But because you're going through this life, it looks like you're sleeping and you're going to wake up in another life, or you're just going to jump somehow. You're just going to end up being recruited, or like 30 years later, you're going to find yourself like, oh my gosh, just by chance, I found myself in this place and I love it. And, you know, those last 20 years maybe helped me prepare for how to engage with patience and difficulty, so that, you know, I know to persevere and delay gratification, and maybe understand impulse control is kind of important, because, you know, I have to understand why something happened. So knowing this, I think, is something we're new to, but we're also used to. Like when I was a kid, probably 10 years old, my dad used to always get these phone calls where he'll be like, congratulations, you just won a trip to, and maybe some of them were true, because sometimes you can, people put draws for other people, like, I like this person, so I'm going to put their name in, and hopefully they'll win this trip, right? So whenever my dad would get these calls, he'd say, yeah, you know, I appreciate that you are calling and offering me this idea, but I'm not somebody who likes to travel. Maybe you can give this opportunity to somebody else. And maybe it's not meant to be like a scam or a gimmick. Maybe it's just a way of saying, you know, we have these extra tickets because this plane is going to Central America for, you know, it's part of like a package deal. And we have 5 extra tickets that nobody bought. And instead of the plane going empty, we're trying to recruit people who maybe will pay half the cost. So instead of it costing $500, they just have to pay $250. And then if they wanted a vacation, well, look, here you go. So it's not really a scam. But people will say, oh, you won a trip. They think it's all free. They don't have to do anything. But it ends up being, well, I mean, we're just trying to market an idea to say, if you're interested, you can go, instead of for $500, you pay $250, and, you know, it'll cover the plane ticket, it'll cover the whole week that you get to spend at a hotel, and you get to have, like, all your meals are free, and you think, whoa, that's actually not a bad idea. That is a good win. And so it's not really a scam, really. It's just almost a way for people to understand how to make the most out of a situation that's going to happen anyway. And if we can make money, then why not? So it's part of innovating new ideas and making the most of any opportunity that kind of presents itself for us.